Welcome, everybody, to this week's podcast episode for the Financial Freedom Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Christopher Liu. And as you know, we talk about four different types of freedom: time, financial, location, health freedom. And in that light, I'm always looking to interview entrepreneurs, influencers, thought leaders, sharing their insights with the world. So today we have Keegan Hadley, and he's a Amazon bestselling author, and he's a therapist providing emotional and psychological coaching, therapy, and content for individuals with injuries. So today is going to be talking all about growing a side businesses, breaking out, social media, blogging, and it's going to be a fantastic conversation. So I'll let Keegan uh, welcome him and introduce himself. So Keegan, welcome.
Welcome. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, uh, it was great to connect via Podmatch,
hmm
and it's tell us more about your background, your
hmm
experiences, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, so I am, as you alluded to, I'm a doctor of occupational therapy. I specialize specifically in individuals who have had an athletic injury, whether formerly they're a competitive athlete or a weekend warrior, and they're suffering psychologically due to those injuries. And that's kind of who I specialize in. And I built this, business on the backside of what I do as a quote unquote day job. So my day job, I'm a neurological and psychiatric clinical researcher. I'm a associate director of medical writing at Supernus Pharmaceuticals. So I write. Writing is a large portion of my day, but I also love connecting with people who have struggles that I have went through myself, because I was an athlete for approaching 2 decades. I played American football, and as a result of that, I tore both of my ACLs, requiring 4 surgeries. So I'm acutely aware of all the types of issues these individuals can have, and obviously everyone's journey is slightly different, but as long as you're able to connect with them, kind of on the overarching sentiment, it's extremely it's extremely rewarding for sure.
Yeah, very interesting. And then tell us, especially, you come from the we're both healthcare, and people assume healthcare is just one thing, just seeing patients, but there's a lot of different skill sets. How does one take skills they know and break into new industries?
Yeah, so for example, I always loved to write. That was kind of something I did recreationally. Like I've always wanted to be a writer. I just unless I wrote, Harry Potter 12 or something, I didn't think I was going to ever make money doing that. So I was always just kind of writing. And then I found after undergrad, I became pretty acutely aware that as a having a degree in pre-med, it doesn't really qualify you to do much of anything, honestly. Um, so when I was, trying to save money for grad school, I saw that in the area I was in, there was a contract research organization, and I had done undergraduate research. So I figured that was, the same. I figured they'd have a lab in the building, and oh boy, there definitely wasn't a lab. So I got my foot in the door at a contract research organization, and through my writing talents, I was able to start writing regulatory documents, which are the documents necessary for FDA approval. So if you're trying to approve a new drug, the FDA has to see, a certain number of documents, and someone has to write those documents. So I was able to do that, and then I've also been rather interested in kind of the health tech sector, kind of the mix between cryptocurrency and health tech. So in like many people, just kind of threw their money in the fire, essentially, because it's very volatile. But I was interested in more of the technology. So as part of that, instead of doing conventional investing over the last 2 3 years, because I'm very knowledgeable in technical writing, so I offer my services to those startups to write the documents for them, because I if it's good enough for the FDA, if it's an unregulated space like the cryptocurrency market, it seems to be I'm plenty qualified to do that. So I've dipped my hand in kind of that because I was interested and I wanted to be involved because I believe in it, but I don't want to just throw my money away because financially I'm extremely, conservative in what I invest in my beliefs as far as that goes. So yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, I know a lot of journalists, they, write about new existing industries, which is quite interesting, and you're not, risking your hard-earned capital. Um, but we'll talk about, you talk about getting past trauma, which we'll talk about a little bit later, but we'll talk about like blogging, for example, because you blogged on the side, you grew a side business, and then now you write, for a health, organization. Tell us what writing has done for you personally and professionally.
Yeah. So as a therapist, I do spend some time, talking to people, but it's actually through writing, and content that I'm spending most of my time. Writing has really given me everything. It's, allowed me to have a very comfortable, income for my family, and it's allowed me to share my experiences to help others who are in similar situations. And not only that, is life uh, tends to happen, everyone goes through different kinds of traumas. As I started to get out of after my second ACL surgery, I'll take a step back and tell you why. After my second ACL surgery that kind of put me off the field for good, I kind of fell down the dark hole, I suppose. So I started abusing substances. I made really poor relationship decisions. I ended up in a relationship with who I would find out would be a very severe alcoholic. And due to that relationship, I endured a lot of emotional abuse, kind of culminating in me being suicidal for a time. And I knew at that point my life was either going to go one of two ways, and I decided obviously to get help and get out of that.
Mm.
And there was a big struggle with me, not only then, but right after when I decided going to therapy, I had a hard time seeing improvement, just the way my brain works. Cognitive behavioral therapy wasn't particularly working, even though it's supremely, effective for a lot of people. And I started going to an ACT therapist, or acceptance and commitment therapy therapist, and I saw help right away. And it was through those journaling, prompts that I got that really pulled me out of, where I was. And through, the couple of years of journaling, it actually created my book, Torn, for me. There was very little writing I actually had to do after my therapeutic journaling. So it was very organic in the way it came out. So it essentially, writing has made my life, but also saved my life. So.
Interesting. And then you talk about, which is, it's always, outlet. When I wrote my book, it is more of an outlet to, get the message out there, share the story. I didn't have to answer it 100 times. I could just, refer the book. And then you talk about, recovering. So psychological flexibility, trauma, healing from trauma. Tell us your thoughts and your emotions around these ideas.
Yeah, so psychological flexibility is kind of an overarching term where you can put ACT or relational frame theory underneath it. And again, ACT is the main intervention I use for my clients, those individuals who are struggling with the psychological challenges associated with physical injury. And essentially, it's for those who aren't aware, if you've heard of cognitive behavioral therapy, it's a very well proven intervention. But Dr. Stephen Hayes, I think it was in the 60s or 70s. I couldn't tell you the exact time, but he started accumulating a lot of literature on ACT. And it's kind of like a close cousin to cognitive behavioral therapy. There's just a slight difference in how you're going about things and what the goals of the intervention is. So for example, for CBT, you're wanting to kind of minimize the symptoms of your illness, whatever the DSM says, whichever slot you fit under. But for ACT, ACT takes into consideration that no matter how healthy or unhealthy you are, there's going to be more difficult times ahead. So it's giving you the tools necessary to, weather those storms in the most effective and efficient way is how I like to describe it. So
Yeah. Interesting. And tell us about you talk about breaking out and how to use what you know to get where you want.
yeah. So again, that kind of goes back to um, I'm one of those people who one of the reasons I chose occupational therapy is because it's very, very flexible. As you know, being a physician, many times, you're a cardiologist, or you're an endocrinologist, or whatever the case. And there, you can't really, because of the amount of schooling you went to, you can't really switch what you're doing clinically. Even though obviously it's an extremely important job. With occupational therapy, it's extremely broad. So we treat the entire individual, physically, psychologically, the whole kind of pack holistically. I mean, that's why we're a holistic provider.
Mhm.
And that's important for me, is because I there's a lot of entrepreneurial type things I want to do. So for example, I know how to write. I'll give you a specific example towards me. I love to write, and I want to write content that matters. I'm not really doing this for money. I have my pharmaceutical job that maybe someday I'll be able to leave, but I want to help people through my content, to make a difference. Because I feel if you're not making a difference in what you're spending day in, day out doing, there's really no purpose to do it. So my content is either, focused on um, tools that people can actively use to get past those issues, or I'm currently working on, more content where people can avoid surgery as much as possible for knee joints. Because even myself, I'm told that I should have a knee surgery, or a total knee surgery again in the near future, just due to the damage that I had. But with a lot of experimenting I've done, I found ways where you can kind of alleviate that, and hopefully provide more longevity in my life. So essentially, if you find out what you have the most pain in your life, for me, it was my injuries and my mental health. You'll generally find a passion underneath that.
Oh,
And if you dig, because most people kind of avoid their pain for obvious reasons, it doesn't feel good. But if you dig into that, you're going to find something you're very passionate about, and a specific group of people that would give you a lot of joy to help. That's one thing, because you can use the skills you already know many times. For me, it's writing. For me, it's my therapeutic background. A lot of times people have the skills necessary to help those that they're very passionate about. Some people are passionate about numbers. Some people, I mean, there are certain things that you already have the skills to do. If you
hmm.
dive into, what's really caused you struggle in the past, and kind of peel back the layers, you might find something that would give your life a lot of meaning if you're struggling with that. I know burnout is a very real issue in the medical community right now, and I think that's advice that I give on a regular basis to a lot of my classmates. I haven't been out in the field too long, but I already have classmates who are struggling with burnout and those kinds of things. So.
Interesting. Yeah, this is fascinating. I think burnout is kind of a universal thing. It's more of based on our culture. One thing you talk about is joint specific training methods, which is very interesting. And what is wrong with current physical training in regard to joints specifically?
Yeah. So it's came out more recently, especially if you've seen the knees over toes guy stuff. His is targeted to a very general audience. I'm more so looking at the individuals again who are trying to prevent total knee surgery. So there's slight differences in what you have to do, but just like anything else, if Chris, if you wanted a strong biceps, would it really be, you know, in your best interest to avoid stressing your biceps, it, you know, at all times? Avoid any kind of workout or any kind of exercise where you would stress your bicep, and you probably wouldn't do that. So I mean, the same. It's kind of the conventional wisdom, not to knock physical therapists or surgeons they're all extremely talented in what they do. But if they haven't went through some of these challenges, especially with the knee, they don't know what it feels like, just like I don't know what it's like to provide surgery and things. But on this side, I definitely have to say that if you slowly and incrementally over time challenge the joint in pain-free ways, obviously we're not going to go through that, but if you can do that over the long term, the amount of improvements you can see is just crazy. There's things I can do now that I never would have been able to even dream of doing after I just kind of avoided anything but lifting weights after I had my last ACL injury, just because I don't want to hurt it again. But there's a way to structure that. There's a lot of isometric type things, full range of motion type things that aren't typically prescribed, but that's what I spend a lot of my time doing, and that's the kind of programs I help to provide to my clients.
Yeah, fascinating. Excuse me. Very fascinating discussion. Really interesting on especially your writing and how you broke into new markets, and how you use it as a personal development tool. I know you're on. How can people follow you on social media, visit your website, contacting you, and look into you?
Yeah, of course. So I am not super active on social media. I do have to preface this with saying I'm very active on LinkedIn. That's kind of my most active social media. I am on Instagram and Twitter at the ACL Therapist, or you can always find me at my website, the ACL Therapist, or KeeganHadley.com. So either one of those, I'm always around, and I'm excited to talk to people and collaborate.
Yeah, and for all the listeners out there, Keegan's resources will be in the links and show notes. Be sure to follow him on his LinkedIn. And with that, thanks so much for coming on to the podcast, and it was a great discussion.
Thank you so much, Chris.